You know that feeling of forgetting something that's really important? Last week, I had put a note in my phone because I needed to give somebody a gift today. And so I set a reminder for yesterday evening, and I saw the note, and then this morning when I went out, I completely forgot the gift. It can feel like quite a battle not to forget the things that are important. But what we're going to see in our chapter today is something of that, the way in which God seeks to keep the things that matter in front of us and bring them to our attention. I'm James, and today I'm going to be responding to Hemant's video, his interpretation of Exodus chapter 17. To give you a little bit of a summary of what happens, the people of Israel they've moved on from their last camp out of the desert of Sin, out of the Sinai desert, and they're on to the next spot, and they run out of water, so they cry to the Lord. He miraculously brings water to them, and then when a war comes, when an enemy army comes, he defeats that army through miraculous means. We're going to focus today on verse 14, because I think it's got some important themes for us to think about. But before we do that, I'm going to show you Hemant's thoughts and see what we make of them. So here's Hemant.
Write this on a scroll. God is saying, I'm totally going to disappear soon, so I need you to take some notes, because people will want to know if I exist, and I don't feel like showing up and settling the question. God failed. He didn't blot out Amalek or his people. We just read about them. Right now. They're in the Bible. That's like the opposite of being blotted out. So much for cancel culture. What's Moses supposed to write on? Has he been carrying paper and pen with him during this whole journey? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Hemant has two challenges to verse 14. And the first is that God wanted Moses to write down this encounter with the Amalekites so that he could go on holiday, could bog off and do his own thing. But the reason that can't stand is that we've got the whole rest of Scripture. The most obvious example of this is in the New Testament. The whole New Testament, starting with the Gospels, claim that God came down into human history in the person of Jesus Christ to not rule or to lord it over people or to start a new fan club, but to die for people that hated him. This just doesn't look like the character of somebody who's not invested in the people that he's with, and that's ignoring the 500 to 1,000 years worth of history between Matthew's Gospel and where we are now. The whole Bible accounts for a God who is deeply involved in the lives of his people. And so verse 14 can't just be, write this so that I can go on holiday. The second point that I'd like to respond to is Hemant's suggestion that verse 14 shows that God failed. So God promised to blot out the memory of Amalek, but it's in the Bible, and so God has failed to blot them out. But that doesn't make sense. If we remove the loaded claims about divinity and authority over us, and we apply that to just a normal day-to-day scenario, we know that it would be nonsense to interpret something like that way. For instance, if I asked you to write me a shopping list so I could shred it, you'd know that was insanity. And that's just not how people interact. Now, the same sort of thing is happening here. At the beginning of the verse, God says to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book. Write it down so people don't forget. And tell it to the people, so to Joshua. And Joshua's not just any old guy. He's the general of the army, back in verse 9. And in a couple of books to come, he will become the leader of the nation of Israel when they go into the land of Canaan. So when it says that he will blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, I think what that means is actually that he is going to remove a physical trace of them. And what remains is the account of how Israel defeated them by God's hand in this chapter here. This verse here shows us what basically the whole Bible is. It's God speaking to his author, to his chosen author, in this case Moses, and giving him a message to publish to God's people. The whole Bible functions that way. The whole of Scripture is God saying to humanity, here's my message. And he brings it to us via an author. And that's thematically very tied to the whole passage. Right the way from verse 1 to the end of the chapter, God's people are utterly dependent on him. And it's a battle again and again to remind them they are dependent. You know, they thirst for water and the people grumble and say, oh, you've brought us out to die. You know, you can go back to chapter 15 or 16, and see exactly the same complaint before the manna and the quail. And then again, when Israel comes to defeat Amalek, it's not because Moses is magic and can put his hands up and do some great stuff that saves the people. It is a trusting, a putting faith in God that saves them. So verse 14 is key because it shows us the way the whole of Scripture works, and at the heart of that is not how a book functions, but what God means to communicate it and how he cares for us. You know, he wanted immortalised in these words something for us to learn. And I think that thing for us to learn is when an enemy comes to destroy God's people, God will protect them. He will vindicate them. And now we can see that in very black and white, simple terms here. In one moment of history, an enemy came over the hill and God gave his people, through faith, the power to overcome them. I think it would be wrong to take that interpretation through to every single moment of our lives. If I jump in front of a bus, I should not expect God to cause the bus to break, in some sort of Superman moment. That sort of picture is given sharper detail as we go through the rest of Scripture, and particularly look at the work and the life and the death of Jesus Christ. But as I've said already, what we have here in verse 14 is a beautiful pro forma of how God communicates to us and with us. I hope that you found something helpful here, that you're encouraged in some way to keep reading the Bible and to think about it on those terms, as not as an old antiquated text, but as the living God communicating something to us about him and about how he relates to us. If you've been helped by this video, it would be great to let me know by putting a like there. If you've got a question or a thought, or you want to take this further, do put something down in the comments. I'm seeking to put out videos every week, so if you don't want to miss out on those, do click subscribe so that you'll be kept up to date with what's coming out and when. Next week's video will likely be chapter 18. I look forward to thinking that through with you then.